Today on our Tech for Business podcast, Jason, our vCIO, and Andrew, our customer strategy advisor, are joining us today to discuss hardware as a service. So I'm going to throw it to Jason first, because I know you work very closely with this, and kind of just give us an overview of what that means and what we're talking about today.
Yeah, that sounds perfect. I know Andrew did a great job teeing up this concept, really. And I think it's so important to get to that fundamental. IT is a service organization that helps the business succeed, right? And so I was mentored by a CFO. So I was in a technical track in my career at Target and went to work for the CFO because at that point in time, which would have been the early mid 2000s, it was very common for IT departments to move into that sort of role of working for the financial wing of the company. So the role there was just to understand, what the idea of a lifecycle management program was sort of phase one, right? So we're not just buying hardware and then letting it run until it dies and dealing with the predictable, unpredictable failures that are going to happen after 3 or 5 years, whatever it is, right? And so when I became an IT director, I started buying equipment on a lifecycle plan, meaning I would before I put anything in the environment, I knew exactly what was going to come back out of the environment. And so that helped me forecast for my finance team how much money did I need, whether I was doing a single capital purchase myself or whether I was going to go and lease or finance, whatever the mechanism for funding that project was. I had to go out and get the hardware, and then we would put it in our environment and manage it until it went away, and so on and so forth. And that was trying to break a lot of bad habits. Again, I know Andrew covered some of this in his previous episode, but the idea that we take hardware, let somebody else use it for a while, and then sort of upcycle it to somebody else. I understand why that's a good use. If you're thinking about responsible use of resources. I actually volunteer for Free Geek. I was on the board of Free Geek here in the cities, which is a technology upcycling nonprofit. So very near and dear to my heart, the idea of maximizing the use of technology. But in a business context, we have to consider also that downtime affects not only the technical team who's supporting it, but the client who isn't getting their work done because their equipment is either underperforming, it's having unpredictable failures, things like that. So the purpose of this whole lifecycle management concept is to avoid predictable failures, kind of build a normalized financial model for what each user is going to cost the business for forecasting. And so when we started to sort of see a shift in the industry towards things as a service, so think about what was Microsoft 365 or Office 365, now Microsoft 365, you are consuming software with the apparatus behind it to deliver a complete solution to the end user. So you don't have to have an email server. Your email server is part of that package. The SharePoint is part of the package. All these things are bundled together with some level of support, and you really subscribe to it. So when you think about something like virtualization, right? You're taking the idea of buying a server for each purpose now and then sharing that resource among it's in sort of that same vein where now we're saying, okay, now hardware. Right now, I still have to buy specific hardware and then do a bunch of stuff to whatever else it is. Well, as a business, if you're not in the business of technology, we can spend an awful lot of time and money managing those endpoints and putting software on them and then finding a way to support them. And my advice has been in that vCIO/strategy advisor hat when I talk to my clients, what IT functions is your team providing that add value to your business versus IT sort of blocking and tackling. And I think hardware as a service, as it relates to endpoints, things like laptops and desktops, even AV equipment in rooms, if you can get a solution that you effectively subscribe to, every month you pay a standard fee, and that includes maybe a laptop. In the case of my commercial workspace clients, I will sell them a laptop that has been curated for their specific needs. So I went out there and did the research for them to figure out what applications do you have, what are their hardware requirements for hard drive space and graphics cards and all that stuff. And then we negotiate pricing on it. We deliver that solution, but we bundle it with our support, our patching, our security, in our case, a rendering offload solution that is unique to CIT that helps that client achieve kind of a greater sales and design output as a result. And we build it all for them. So their IT team doesn't even need direct support. We can help deploy it. When the clients have problems, they call us. And so that technology team is freed up to focus on things that are really driving value in their business. And we're dealing with building economy of scale around delivering that hardware as a service package to take a lot of that minutia off your plate. And frankly, I think it's a little bit controversial as someone who grew up as a desktop support technician. I'm taking a lot of the work that I love to do, which, and as I'm holding up an actual microprocessor from like the 90s, right? I mean, I love tinkering with hardware. And I think it is a bit of a trap, a controversial moment here, that IT people spend a lot of time playing with hardware in their environments that isn't ultimately helping solve a strategic business problem, which is where if we're going to spend money on technology, that's where I want my team to spend their time. Because sometimes business leaders don't really even value that work. And so as an internal team member, if I'm focusing on stuff that I think is great and valuable, and the team's like, I flip the light switch and the lights come on because electricity just works. I feel like my computer should kind of be that way. So to me, when I was in a leadership position, using this methodology was successful in really driving the results my team was achieving towards business goals and away from sort of IT blocking and tackling. And so when I bring that mindset to CIT, that's really where it comes from, is trying to help clients in that commercial workspace services industry that have really unique needs find a curated hardware solution, pairing it up with the right support and services, and selling that to them as a monthly service that they just subscribe to. What do you think, Andrew?
I love it. And I think, being in that trusted advisor role, you can better provide the hardware, right? You can say, with everything that we've moved off, right? We don't have the on-prem exchange. We don't have the SharePoint servers. Things are moving to the cloud. And so there's less demand on our workstations for some individuals. Obviously, you're always going to have those power users that need that, but there's less and less demand. So you can better, we can better curate that and say, okay, this is what you need. You're moving to the cloud. You don't need to buy the latest and greatest desktop that's going to cost you, a couple $1,000s, when a terminal that has some processing power can do that as well. So being able to put that as a full strategy is definitely, what we're driving for. And so it goes into our past conversations. It's easier to have that asset inventory. It's coming from one place, right? The life cycle, we're driving that, and being able to make sure that life cycle is followed. One laptop a month sounds like a lot, but if you just think about a 4-year cycle, if you have 48 devices in your business, that's one a month for a 4-year cycle, right? Like it really compounds when you think about it that way. And it's really, okay, yeah, this is something that we shouldn't have the big capital expense on, for a lot of reasons that we've gone into before, with just devices being all at the same age and things like that. So when you do those kind of services, Jason, is it more leasing options and then they own the equipment at the end, or is it more of a, at the end of the term, it's the equipment is part of the service?
Yeah, I think we've approached it a couple different ways. So it depends on the client and the engagement. So,
Yeah.
it is, Todd Sorg would tell, it depends.
It depends, yeah.
We have bugs, and I have one on the way, by the way. So I would look at it as, I prefer not to have to deal with, personally, the hardware at the end of the cycle. So the first one of these we did, hardware as a service, was a bundle where we were actually directly leasing that product to the end user. And at the end of that, they have the choice of buying it out or sending it back to us, and we can move it on, whatever the program is. One of the things I found interesting, though, is that we can now offer lease programs where the leasing agency will, in effect, do 0% interest on a larger purchase of equipment, right? So the client is paying a monthly fee per device, and at the end of that lease, they take it back. And I think this is and that's where they make their money. Transparent, right? They're going to make their money by refurbishing that equipment and selling it to a different market, sometimes different parts of the world, whatever else it is. But what I like about that is it kind of closes the loop on things like asset management and disposal at the end of a product's life. So if we're following whether CMMC, pick one that Nate and our security team would want to talk about, the alphabet soup of regulations, you really have to have a program for managing the data on devices that are being offboarded. So if part of that lease program or hardware as a service program is to, in fact, take those assets, put them through a predictable process for data removal, for protecting PII and everything else, and then giving a certification list saying that act was done, you've taken another workload item off of somebody's plates, and also helping the industry that is financing it offer the client something like 0% financing. So now you've got a client who's paying a much more affordable rate for the hardware, potentially the services that are, in the case of my team, I was actually getting rid of work they didn't want to do in the first place, which was patching and other things that were just, again, my team was busy. They had other things to do that were innovation driven. And so I was taking that work off their plate, bundling it up, and it worked really well. So, I would say it really depends on the client's appetite. At Target, we had to capitalize our leases, so there were some different financial implications for it. At CIT, I just love the idea that we can offer whichever option the client really wants. If they want to buy it, get their own financing, that's totally cool. And then we work, of course, with our vendors to negotiate the best pricing we can get and then offer that to them and pre-curate the experience. I think the analogy as well is we in IT, a lot of us are generalists that have to do something one time and then move on to the next thing. And what you'll find is it's very inefficient to do anything the first time in a technology environment, right? All the things that the salesperson tells you up front may not, in the experience you're having with your environment, be exactly the same. And that's why bringing the firm in who sort of said, hey, we're going to sell this to you and we're going to see it implemented all the way is a really nice way to deliver something with accountability all the way through the process, which is why I really also like bundling hardware as a service. In the case of this, I call mine for our designers design technology as a service because it is specifically curated for an industry, a set of applications, a set of performance expectations. And in fact, I'm using those recommendations to even inform partners in the industry. If you want to make a recommendation to a client, have done the research, let's share some of that information to create a sense of community and frankly, self-servingly, to drive people to us to say, well, what else do you have? Nobody else is driving these insights. What else do you think I should do? And so there's a lot of benefits to us, and there's also a lot of benefits to those end users. But again, it is, I think Andrew and I share that same philosophy. It's driven by helping a client get out of minutia of technology that doesn't help them achieve what their business is in business to do. So if you're a printing company, focus on printing, not on making sure that your endpoints get managed for 4 years. Now that's our job.
And that's come more and more because technology is in all of our jobs, no matter if you're in finance, if you're in printing, if you're in manufacturing, if you're in construction, right? It's one of those that, the construction has to, give updates and with an iPad or whatever that is, being able to have that technology and have a trusted advisor to say, hey, here's where you're going. This is what we see and how we can help you get there.
Yeah.
So it's clear the benefits of this. I mean, we talk a lot about budget and we talk a lot about, if you're not in IT, then you don't have to be the person managing it. What are some of the challenges with this type of service, or what's the pushback that you get when you're speaking to a client about this?
Sure. I would say,
if any, I don't know.
Well,
Maybe there's not.
No, there's absolutely pushback. And I think it's good. I mean, I want clients who are their own advocates first. And I want them to challenge me because, again, I've been in the seat. I've been on the other side of this sort of, managed service provider versus being the IT director who employed a managed service provider, right? And so, the first and foremost, it's we still need to make a margin on this product, right? And so for us, it is an advantage to bundle hardware, which is typically a lower margin product, with higher margin products like services, because it's a product that we sell directly. We're not having to mark something up that is going through a distributor or, HP, whatever it is, HP, Dell, so on and so forth. They have to make their money too. So by sort of shortening that cycle, we can blend products, which helps us manage our margins better. So we can kind of play with the numbers a little bit internally to give even a better value sometimes to our clients, because we are bundling those products. But I think it's sometimes a sticker shock, right? So for example, if I just say, hey, I'm going to charge you $350 a month per designer for the laptop and all the stuff, they say, holy expletive here, what do you mean? And I said, but if we unpack this number, I will show you what our normal managed services rate sheet is. Here's all the pieces you're getting. And so I think it just comes down to you're paying a lot. This is actually the really my sale, if you want to call it that, is I'll help a client unpack what their real costs are today. And often they are grossly underestimating what they're actually paying for things. It's kind of like taxes, right? You've got sales tax over here and you've got something out here and registration tax. It's all these little costs that accumulate into a very large number that if you look at it all at once, it's a totally different story than looking at it in small pieces. So I help clients pull those small pieces together and say, here's what you're actually paying today, both in labor that maybe you're not capturing. Because if you have an IT person full time and they're spending 3 hours a week doing this, that time isn't free. That's either an opportunity cost, they're not doing something else, or you're just paying them labor to, I don't know what they're doing. So we're replacing something there and then freeing up that time to do something else. So there is that value. So I would say the challenge is that I have to work with a client that if they've never looked at their own financials that way before, it's the first time. But again, I think that's a good thing because I think us being trusted advisors, if I can't sit down with somebody with a CFO title or a controller title and talk about the financials of their IT environment competently, then I really don't have any business making a proposal to them about what I think they should buy that they're going to be committed to for 3 to 4 to sometimes 5 years.
Yeah.
So, my opinion, of course. What do you think, Andrew?
Yeah, I completely agree. I kind of put it together like all the different streaming services. Like, okay, you have, some of these where it's, okay, you have Apple TV over here and Paramount and then Peacock and Hulu and Netflix, and it's a big cost altogether. So you're seeing kind of that model of, okay, well, if you buy Hulu, ESPN, and Disney Plus, we'll give you a discount on it. And that's, if you look at that sticker shock, it's big, as you said before. But really break it down, yeah, it's, you're getting a value instead of going out and just buying the device it yourself, right?
Yeah.
Setting it up yourself, maybe not have a consistent configuration. There's so much that goes into it on that technical side to get the device out of the box and to the user. There's the acquisition part, but there's also that in between part that you have to make sure that the end user doesn't care how it got to them. They just want it to work. And being a trusted advisor, we can fill that role and help supplement. So maybe that internal staff doesn't have to do that. They don't have to spend the 3 hours per device to take off the bloatware and get the applications installed. You have the service that it just comes to you. And it's built in with everything else because they know your environment. So if an application changes, great. We have that documented, and we're able to get that set up for you.
Right. No, I think that bundling concept was key. I think you really had a strong point there because, again, as someone who sat in that seat, and it's incredible how many contracts. If I'm looking at the typical commercial furniture dealership, it is an atypical vertical market because the IT budgets are typically less than 1% of revenues, which is off the charts low compared to most industries. So they are starting from a position of managing scarcity before they even start doing anything. And so by bundling this, what I'm also allowing is if we can keep the prices competitive. So we're looking at, here's what we're actually paying today. We're going to bundle these costs. So it's a bigger single cost, but you're not managing 6 or 7 different vendors, all those business processes you alluded to, how to build a laptop, how to manage it, how to life cycle it off of your books at the end of its life cycle, including all of that adds a tremendous amount of value to somebody or a small team that is already running lean. You're helping them prevent, again, dealing with sort of subscriptive services that aren't adding a lot of value, but have a profound impact on users. The other thing is it is aligning the incentives of both us as a managed service provider and them as a client. So we are going out and choosing hardware that we want to be stable and performant for that client. So they're not calling us for support. So that helps us manage our costs internally so we can be more successful, more profitable, and then do a better job innovating going forward. And the client benefits because they're not feeling the noise, right? We're not selling them, Johnny's cut rate laptop. We're buying something that is in our best interest and in theirs. And I think from an IT management standpoint, that alignment is part of their strategy. Is really important when you're working with third-party service providers that you want to, it's like, and people do what they're incentivized to do. We as an MSP have to do the same for our clients. And so I think that's where hardware as a service really, it aligns very nicely with their interest and our own. And I think that's a good, just cultural fit for CIT and our CIT way of really helping those clients and understand their people and respecting their time.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I was going to say, I didn't even think of that. But that is such a good point about that kind of harmony between the two.
Harmony, I like
so yeah.
Yes.
So Andrew, I wanted to push you a little bit more, being someone who is constantly working with customers from that strategy point of view. And we talked a lot about budget, but what are some of the key considerations that you have to have when you're talking about getting hardware lifecycle, and then this hardware as a service? What is kind of that conversation that you're having?
The conversation is really around really looking where they're at right now. If their environment hasn't had a life cycle, there's going to be if you're doing a big purchase right, it's going to be a big capital C or capital E expenditure, right? Capital C, capital E expenditure, right? And so that's that sticker shock. That's the $100,000, $200,000 because you need the new server. You have workstations that are out of date. You need a new wireless. You need new switching. And if it hasn't been managed, it's usually a 2 to or more. I just worked with a client who hey, we came in, we identified everything, and it's a 3-year process to make sure that we have a new phone system, new infrastructure, new servers. And they're working with me. They're like, yeah, we know we need to do this, and this is how we need to go through it. So hardware as a service helps, keep those peaks and valleys nice and level. We can continue to help that if we're the ones that are supporting them after they have this, or if they go to somebody else. I always go, I'm going to make what decision I believe is best for the customer, because that's what I'm here for. I'm that trusted advisor to make sure that they're buying the right equipment. And part of that is making sure that they have a predictable budget. They don't have to dig into their coffers or go out to investors and say, hey, we need another round of funding because our former IT provider, or the person we trusted with their IT environment wasn't doing what we thought they were doing, or we're behind, or our server is out of date and we need to get it up to date because it didn't have a warranty, right? It's unfortunately it's not common, but it's an unfortunate situation we've run into where we have to say it's not under warranty anymore. Sorry, customer, but this is what we have to do. And it's a difficult conversation. So trying to avoid those conversations in a productive way of saying, okay, this is why we're doing these, and bringing it back to the business side. If you have your workstations up to date, your employees are going to be able to be more efficient because they're not working with
It's
downed
used.
equipment or slow equipment, which means your customers are going to be able to get the product that they are buying you for. Going back to the printing, a graphic designer can't do any graphics if their computer is down, which means they're not able to make money, which means the satisfaction on your end isn't there. And we all know, so we just want what we want at that time. They don't care why it's not going, right? But
Yeah.
that's the same with us, where we need to make sure that everything is in line and making sure that it's there for the customer and leveling that line out.
And, I want to build on 2 points you make. So I think they led to things that reminded me of my own journey here, embracing it. And printing. Like the whole printing managed services thing has actually been around for a long time. Like they've been doing hardware as a service, right? So they're bundling, often it's staples and the toner and the service, and they're charging you per click or per impression, black and white versus, and I think honestly, there's no reason that model can't exist, because printers are complex devices, especially if you're dealing with things like firies and rips and all the fanciness that gets attached to these multifunctions. So
tell any technician to install a printer and they're gonna freak out at you, because it's never as easy as just installing a printer.
But I think it honestly, and if I was talking to another salesperson about how do you really open the conversation about this, it really is a lot like that. I don't know why we haven't chosen to embrace the same model around the other endpoints, because they're both very capital intensive purchases. They often get broken down to a monthly, per use cost that is predictable over time. One thing I did find interesting is when onboarding a new client who just came to CIT, and I'm super excited to work with them. They're national on both coasts. We really looked at financing, and they had a problem very similar to one you just described, which is some hardware they purchased within the last few months or the last year or two. And my advice was, it's going to hurt the first time we do this, because there's never a perfect time to say, hey, I mean, there's probably a best time if you looked at 3 years. But if you're trying to do something in a reasonable amount of time, like there's not a great time to say, I'm just going to start replacing everything at the same time every 3 years and 4 years or 5 years. But if you can work with a partner who will actually buy the old assets and make them safe to sell, and then credit that back to the client, that is something we can offer clients in many cases. If they have hardware that is still viable, but they want to switch to a program where, again, we're going to common aligned hardware models, because that does have a downstream positive impact on their productivity and on their support experience. But if we can make that one hit a little more manageable for them with kind of a creative solution like that, I think it helps them get over some of those financial bubbles. And again, it gets back to aligning, their interests with our interests, and getting to that end game where, again, they don't have to worry about it. And that's the biggest thing, right? When something breaks, these laptops typically are going to come with an accidental protection plan. So if even an employee drops it, they don't have to worry about the leasing company coming after them for some kind of core charge deposit, like you left your apartment and now you're going to have to pay $600 to get it clean, whatever it is. You're really trying to think about, how do I make sure that client has a great experience through the end of that lease program and offboarding, and then also that we're preparing them for a new device and a new approach every 3 to 4 to 5 years, which does invite those larger, even bigger strategic reviews. Because I think you and I both know, Andrew, as you look at with clients, we have to build these calendars on sometimes a 3 or 5 year basis just to catch renewal times, because that's when a client really can resize and think about contracts. That's probably a different podcast conversation, is
Yeah.
managing all those contracts and budgets.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But I'd say you can sell big deals on 5 lines, cost
Yeah.
per user per laptop, cost per user for support, all these things. And it becomes
Mhm.
simpler for them to consume technology, which is another thing. And I'll finish on that point before I shut up for a second, Andrew, which is
Yeah.
the biggest complaint I get from business owners who I've worked with is invoices are too complicated. You're selling me a bunch of, again, dirty word here, stuff I don't understand. And that hurts us, and it hurts any provider who maybe feels like they aren't trusted now because we're overly complicating a simple conversation. And I'm famous for this, so I've had to learn it, which is just get to the point. What's it going to cost me per user or per month to get a designer what they need to be effective and not be calling me because their stuff doesn't work?
It's
And so we present them a simple solution. We worry about the complexity on the back end because that's what we do. We're technologists, right? Anyway.
No, going off of your several years, is workstation replacement should be in the same conversation as going to the cloud. It may not have the pizzazz as the cloud, right? But it's still a big part of your IT budget.
Mm-hmm.
And knowing where your devices are going and how you're managing them throughout the entire life cycle. And you've said it several times, Jason. It's not just product acquisition, but it's how it's leaving your environment and how it's being disposed of. We also have a responsibility to our environment and how these devices are leaving our use, to regulatory agencies, but also just to kind of just the community, of making sure that we're not contributing to e-waste. And there's a lot of programs out there, and seeing that through the life cycle instead of taking it and throwing it out the back of a truck, which is unfortunate that some people do that. But it's that full life cycle that you mentioned before that is really, it's not just when it leaves your environment, it's once it leaves full functionality, you could say.
Well, and I'll segue into something else, which is a topic I think is adjacent to this, but I think the whole as a service model supports this, which is, it was scary for me as a technician and at the time a target space talking about outsourcing, right? Because at some point it's like, am I just giving somebody else my job over time, right? And it happens. Like, we even displace other people's jobs sometimes, and that's an uncomfortable conversation, but it's also the reality. But what we find also is, when I did that, I went over to India and spent 2.5 weeks training a technology team. And what we found was that team worked 12 hours offset from our main team. So they were working a lot of shifts. So we could have a continual workforce that was always kind of getting this work done. And then I could step back from some of that day-to-day patching work and do something else. Well, when I got to my tech team at the dealership that I worked with, I was able to take work that they want to do off their plates. So this sort of managed services concept freed them up to really innovate. And that innovation, that doing things that the business cared about, elevated them in their careers. They were then recognized by the business they worked for, wow, you're there, you're going to the trade shows I go to, you're listening to these business problems I have, even though it's not your business per se, you're looking at it as an advocate, you're becoming a force multiplier. And to me, that is the ultimate evolution of someone in an IT career that is inside of a business like that, right? Where you're helping build the report that helps a leader find an insight to find a new market that nobody else in that business has found yet. Or you find a manufacturing issue preemptively that prevents a major issue. So you're doing proactive things in the business. And I feel like that is the business result of this sort of investment in hardware as a service upstream, is it's taking minutia off of IT's plate to focus on other things that really affect their customer experience more profoundly. So that's my big thought of the day. I only get one of them, and now I'm tired. So I've had it.
And now we're done.
That's right. That's right.
That's so good. I was curious, and kind of as we finish up here, we talked a lot about like designers and creatives, and is this hardware as a service right for every industry, or are there some that wouldn't benefit from it and would still live within that traditional hardware model? And then anything else you kind of want to share as we close up here?
Well, I'll say when I was looking at, when I came to CIT, not long ago, back in May, the idea of being able to curate the hardware in the industry that I'm working in very specifically was a kill. Like I, for 15 years, have been the person that a lot of people in the industry would come to when they said, I have to buy a laptop and I don't understand what I need to purchase. And so that was part of the value that I brought. So I offer that service. But I would honestly say that it's more useful than you might think, because I mean, a lot of the applications that our clients use, and Andrew can, I'm sure, second this point, right? The stack becomes pretty similar. It's Microsoft, Adobe, maybe the Autodesk suite, whatever it is. And there are somewhat predictable hardware solutions for that. There's a separate discussion of consumer grade hardware versus professional grade hardware. I have played on both sides of that line as far as cost versus budget, blah, 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 blah. But I would say I can't think of an industry that wouldn't benefit from this. Really depending what I mean, if they really want to be the team that has a team that works on their laptops, that's a choice. They can choose to pay extra to have that sort of personalized level of service. Each employee maybe gets a unique solution. There are shops that prefer that style. They want everybody to pick their own hardware. And that's a different management approach. It's a different cost structure entirely. If you're really looking at, I think, generally maximizing your investment in your technology and endpoints, I think hardware as a service can probably fit. If it's really priced well and priced properly, it's not more expensive. It's really just about taking costs you're already absorbing somewhere else and just helping you understand where you are making that trade-off, and then making sure that as you work with you on your budget 6 months, a year down the road, that you see those benefits happen. But what do you think, Andrew?
Yeah, I completely agree. And taking away the additional conversations is right now it's building those plans in my role. But if you don't have, somebody who is on top of your life cycle of making sure that you are replacing your network equipment, your laptops, your servers at a certain interval, it can get out of whack. And so, making sure that you have that predictability is big. It takes it away from somebody else, right? It's part of that service that we provide. Is not just the hardware, it's the scheduling, the acquisition. That time adds up really quickly. When somebody has to go in and be like, okay, well, who's doing this? How am I doing this? Usually it's somebody who isn't. Sometimes if they don't have an on-site IT, somebody who may not know what a good life cycle for a desktop is, or a laptop. So having that service is just another peace of mind. It's making sure that you can work and not have to worry about technology.
I think we've actually overcomplicated this whole, not us, but I think the industry as a whole has made this way more complicated than it needs to be. And I think the fact is, business leaders are sick and tired of being told that they can't possibly understand the details. They're like, that's BS. I need to know what it's going to cost per user per month to do their job, because that's part of my forecasting. And I think we can deliver that. And I think that's, again, boiling all this down to that basic point. It's an understandable way to predict what it's going to cost to put somebody into a laptop, and then the software, or laptop or desktop, and something they need to run and do their job effectively. So then that business owner, as much as the tech team, can focus on the bigger strategy, to know that, if you look at the other services they might buy, that their backups are handled, that their security environment is handled, that users are being managed effectively, that meetings will start on time because they don't have crappy technology in their conference rooms, that they want to focus on business. And this, to me, is empowering them to do that. And then that's why I'm so excited about that. That's why this is one of the first things I really wanted to set up when I came to CIT. And I was grateful that Kyle and you and the team also said, hey, we should do this, right? So we set up a client with it, and so far it's been successful. It is tricky to do. I'll go to one point that we didn't make earlier, which is when you do hardware as a service for a client that has an existing managed services or IT relationship, you suddenly are doing what's called co-support and mingling things. That can get tricky. And that is something that we are working through as we look at this program for clients that we aren't doing all their other services. How do we coexist with an existing managed service provider and understand where those lines have to be drawn between, if you change something and our laptops become less performant, I have to be able to hold you responsible for that, but not play a tennis match in front of a client over who's responsible while their stuff is down and on fire. So But that's the nuance of the beauty. We have to manage not just the technology, but the expectation and the relationships that make those successful products. So putting a pin in it.
Perfect. Well, thank you both so much for joining us today. If you liked this podcast, please like and subscribe. If you have a question or a topic you'd like us to discuss, please reach out to us at info@cit-net.com or head out to our website, cit-net.com/podcast. And we'll be back next week with an all-new episode.